I might have to change my settings now. I've just had a camera malfunction, if you can believe it. Can you still see me, or have I disappeared completely?
Just the logo at the moment.
Yeah. I've disappeared completely. I'm back. Oh. I'm back in the room.
No.
And
but you're facing the wrong way. You're facing the leaflet stand.
Oh this is why I do not do technical things. Normally there is somebody dealing with all of the camera stuff, and I just stand in front of it and talk because I am very good at waffling, apparently. There we go, back in the room. All right, let me get my chat function up because that is where all of my questions and stuff are. So Lilith and Abby, do you want to, I don't have your actual book, but I have a printout of your book here. Geared for Queers. Do you want to kind of give us a little rundown about what the book is about?
Yeah. So in 2016, we cycled. We went on our first ever long cycle tour through Europe, and we cycled from Amsterdam to Montpellier. And we were complete beginners, had no idea what we were doing, and so got into a lot of sort of problems and misadventures. But basically, it ended up turning into this piece of travel writing, this memoir, which was published on June the 4th this year. Yeah. And it's our first ever book, and it's written by both of us. We sort of swap chapters as we go through the book. And yeah.
It just tells the story. We were on the road for about 90 days, so it tells the story of our 90 days cycling.
Yeah.
Very cool. So do you want to give us a little reading first of all, or do you want to take some questions?
Yeah, a little reading, just to give you a taste of it.
That sounds perfect.
So, this is a chapter written by Abby, but
I'm Abby, by the way.
Abby. But I'm going to read it aloud because Abby hates reading aloud.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is in Switzerland. We woke up in the morning at a hostel, and we were camping most of the way, but we'd started staying at hostels in Switzerland because it was getting really cold, like below 0 degrees at night. And so we woke up at this hostel, and we had a puncture immediately on Abby's rear tire. We mended it, we set off, and then about 20 kilometers in, we realized her tire had gone flat again. So we cycled into this like walled town in Switzerland to try and repair it at a bike shop, which we did. We got the inner tube changed. We set off again. And that's where this kind of extract finds us.
Okay.
Lily, I'm really struggling. It felt like I was pedaling through thick mud. I just couldn't work out why. Lily was cycling at a fair pace ahead. I'd been complaining for a good hour on and off, but we needed to get to the hostel, and Lily wasn't stopping for anything. I need to stop, I shouted at Lily. They braked and turned. I stood over my bike and felt round to the tyre. It was completely flat. It's flat, Lily. I was annoyed. Annoyed at the tyre and the man who had brutally pushed the new tube in, and annoyed that I'd been riding on a flat for an hour while Lily ignored my complaints. I was totally worn down. I got off my bike and threw it to the floor. I give up. Lily wheeled over in stony silence. Let's have a break. We wheeled our bikes off the path and into a small forest clearing where trunks on their sides created a natural circular seating area. I sat down, put my head in my hands, and allowed the hopeless feeling to wash over me. Switzerland had beaten me. The hills were one thing, the cold another, but 3 flat tyres? There was no way I could keep going. Lifting my head, I looked around me. Were these here when we sat down? Lily looked up and started. Surrounding us in the clearing were hundreds of strange wooden gnomes of different shapes and sizes who formed a circle with us in the centre. They were on the benches, in the trees, hiding in the undergrowth. If you looked anywhere long enough, one would emerge. It's like some sort of weird coven, I whispered to Lily. After all the troubles of today, it made sense we were going to be murdered by tiny mythical creatures. I looked from one smiling face to the next. I feel like they're mocking us. We sat exhausted in this surrealist nightmare. The sun was beginning to set, and we still had at least 10 kilometers to go. I don't want to be here when it gets dark, I half joked, tilting my head at the gnome to my left, which glared back with hollowed out eyes. Let's pump up your tyre and see if it lasts. We can always keep pumping it regularly until we get there. I nodded my head. Patty had been rideable for a while after leaving Arrow. I walked over to attach the bike pump and started the laborious process of hand inflating the tyre to 100 psi. I removed the plastic nubbin. The valve was loose. Clearly, one of us hadn't fully closed it. I side-eyed Lily. Maybe this was the cause of our problems this time. With the tyre reinflated, we cycled out of the demented gnome forest and onto another long agricultural path. I felt miserable. Knockback after knockback had left me feeling like I wanted to quit. Being this drained, both physically and mentally, was something I'd never experienced before. I had wanted to challenge myself with this tour, to see if I could push past my limits, but I hadn't known how I'd react when I reached them. What surprised me... Sorry, I'm interrupted by a cat. What surprised me as I pedalled on and on was the deep sense of determination propelling me forwards. There was something there that wouldn't let me stop, something that had grown since the early days in the Netherlands. I felt more confident and more resilient. I felt stronger. The sun was setting quickly behind the Jura Mountains, and I pedalled faster, keen to get to the hostel before nightfall. Yeah, that's my wee extract.
And do you know what? It's very funny. I know we've spoke about your book before, but I like how you've kind of taken it chapter by chapter and injected some humor and stuff into there as well. It's a very real story, which is good.
The like creepy thing as well about the gnome forest was that we then mentioned it to a Swiss friend of ours who had grown up near Solothurn where that happened, and we were like, oh yeah, we cycled through this weird gnome forest, and she was like, the what? And I was like, the gnome forest, and she was like, there isn't a gnome forest.
We couldn't find it on
I have
the map
no idea what you're
either.
talking about. And we were like, does it exist? Like, was it just some kind of fever dream?
Wow. Well, maybe. So obviously you've wrote this book together. Writing as a pair, how did you kind of jointly agree what goes in the book, and then what maybe doesn't need to be put in the book?
We were lucky in some ways because when we were touring, Lily kept a very sort of day-to-day diary of what was happening each day. So a lot of what we wrote, we took directly from that. And in some ways, writing as a pair made it a lot easier because we were able to say, oh, can you remember, this place? And the other one would be like, oh, it was where this happened. And I'd be like, oh, I'd forgotten about that. And then we'd kind of jolt each other's memory a lot along those lines.
Yeah, and I think there are occasional disagreements about kind of how things happened or what actually happened, especially in terms of arguments and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were both aware that, like, because each of us was kind of telling each day, it would have been easy to fall into just portraying the other person as like the bad guy in any given scenario and just being like, they were horrible, they were completely in the wrong, and I was always in the right. And so I think like we did have to have conversations where we were just like, okay, well, like what was going on for you there? Like, how can we balance that?
There is one exception though, isn't there?
Yeah.
In terms of arguments. So there's one chapter where we had a huge argument on the tour, probably the worst argument we've ever had in our relationship as well.
At one point I like hurled my fully loaded bike just into a puddle, and I was just like, I'm done. And then Abby's pedaled off, but I couldn't get my bike out of this puddle, so I was just like covered in mud trying to pull this bike off, furious.
It wasn't great
into the distance,
but we couldn't decide who'd write it. So in the end I wrote my idea of what happened, and then Lily wrote the same chapter in a shortened version straight afterwards. So it's a chapter that we double up on, but it was sort of done as a...
And I think when we were writing in terms of like what we put in or what we took out, when we kind of did a first draft, like we pretty much put everything in there and we're just like, let's write it out and see how it feels. And then it was kind of only later when we were working with our editor that we started to think about like, okay, well, who's going to be reading this? Do we want people to know that about us? Like, what do we feel comfortable with sharing? Like, where are those kind of like private boundaries? Because it is a memoir, so it is about us. And that can feel weird. And I think even now, like we sometimes get that kind of like vulnerability hangover with it, where we're just like, oh God, like we massively overshared and we want to take it all back immediately. But I think it helped that we were working with like a really good editor, and she was really like helpful in asking us like, do you feel comfortable sharing that? Or like, do you need to be quite so graphic with this description of like bowel movements?
By
really
rivers.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty. Sounds like you had it kind of figured out, which is good. So I suppose our second question then is, if you were to do a sequel to Gears for Queers, where would you like to document?
So we kind of had discussions about this because we went on another long tour last year. Last year. So we cycled from Kirkcaldy to Budapest. So more kind of like east to west. And you've kind of talked about wanting to write that.
I'd really like to start writing
Gears
it
for
now.
Queers Part 2, Gears to Queers. Gears for Queers Tokyo Drift.
Yeah.
But I think for me it's like two things. One, I would quite like to feel like the book's sort of settled and we've been able to go through that whole process because, you know, like we missed out on doing a lot of the like literature festivals and events and stuff this year, so I quite like to see that through. And then I think it's also like that feeling of right now it feels like it would be really weird to be writing and kind of summoning a time that's like pre-COVID. Like, I don't know about you, but I definitely find it hard to remember before when I knew about all of this stuff happening. So like the idea of writing about a tour that happened last year feels almost further away than this tour does. So I think we will maybe write something around that tour, but I think we might give it some time to settle.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. I don't know what I had for dinner, and that was like an hour ago.
We did keep a really good diary.
Yeah,
again, didn't we?
I was
were
much
ready
more
for
methodical in that diary, because in the first diary, because we didn't plan to write the book, so there's some days that we'd flip to and it's me just being like, ate porridge, had a cry, now we're in Switzerland, and I'm just like, this is not helpful
yeah,
information.
there was a lot of looking at Google Maps and working out.
You're
the
like,
names
where
of
was?
towns.
Like,
I mean, maybe next time document why you had a cry, and then
yeah.
Okay, so if Gears for Queers was to be adapted for a television show, who would you want cast to play you?
We always say that if we were to be cast as anyone, it would be Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. like twins, but because we've laughed about this before. I have no idea who I'd actually want to play us. Like,
no.
I think having someone truly absurd is probably like the shit way.
I can see that being like a Netflix comedy series.
Yeah, French
absolutely.
and Saunders. That would be good.
French and Saunders. Any comedy, or like you know how Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan do the Trip, where they go and like they could do that, but on bikes and be us, which I think would work. Yeah, I'd watch it.
I think I'd probably watch that too. Okay, what's my next question? So, are there any other travel writers or writers in general who inspire your writing style?
That's an interesting question.
There are definitely like travel writers or like writers that we kind of aspire to, but will never reach. There's an amazing author, Emily Chappell, who's also a long distance cyclist and is like a far better cyclist and a far better writer than either of us will ever be. But I think she did an amazing job of really capturing.
I feel really weird about calling myself a writer still, and I think it's because we never planned to write a book. We sort of fell into it because we created zines about our tour when we came back from the tour, and sort of like little handmade booklets, and they fell into the hands of an editor through sort of like a chain of friends, and she was the one who approached us and asked if we wanted to write about it. So yeah, calling myself a writer and thinking about things like my style and stuff is something that I haven't done. I haven't thought of much.
I would say like the first thing we did, we met the editor Kay at Henderson's in Edinburgh for like a cup of coffee the first time we met her to have a chat about the possibility of writing a book. And like the first thing we did after that meeting was like peg it to Waterstones and just find all of the cycling books and just like flip through them and be like, okay, how have they written this? And I think that really helped as well in terms of like, you know, there's a great book that's like Eat, Sleep, Cycle, and there's another one that was like Mud, Sweat and Gears. And there's one that was there's Anne Musto, who's an amazing writer and cyclist as well. And I think looking at all those really gave us a sense of how people kind of told a story in their travel and shaped it into like a narrative. So I think that was like our,
because I think as well we both read a lot of fiction, but non-fiction is something we'd only just started reading, and it was learning a bit more about how to write non-fiction, and that took a lot of time and a lot of working on. But there are things like Into the Wild and what's the one about going up Everest by
Everest? No, Cold Mountain. Into Cold Air.
It's not Cold Air. I can't remember. It's by John Cracker.
I'm sure someone is shouting at their screen.
Into Thin Air.
Into Thin Air.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Cracker.
Yeah. So yeah.
Very cool. Oh, well, I've got one more question, I think, coming through. I think it's really funny that you're not quite like there to kind of call yourself a writer yet when you've got something published. Like, I know you kind of fell into it, but you've both been really creative, like with the zines and stuff. So I think we will end your questions with this one. And you can answer separately because I'm sure they'll be different. But what were your guys? I hope. I think. What were your favorite books growing up?
Ooh.
Did you read growing up?
Yeah, a lot. It was basically the only thing I did. But now I've got to think. What I like science fiction. I love science fiction, and I read a lot of fantasy. And a lot of the books I read. Trying to think of ones. I read like a lot of George Orwell. I read a lot of H.G. Wells. I read a lot of. I love dystopian stuff. So I enjoyed. I like Handmaid's Tale. I loved.
Yeah.
I also anything by Hardy or Dickens as well.
You
I'm
were
a big
quite
fan
like
of.
a hardcore reader.
Yeah,
I
I
was
really
very
like.
much like I liked reading a lot, but I really liked stories. So I was really into like His Dark Materials, that trilogy. And
I did love Harry Potter.
Yeah,
as well.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Although I stopped reading Harry Potter like book 5 because I was just like, I can't deal with the angst. I'm a teenager. He's a teenager. I can't handle it. My heart, my childhood. No, I'm putting it away. It's going in a box. I know that's probably personally offensive to you, Jade.
Not at all.
But yeah. So
you read a lot of.
I read a lot of that, and yeah, I think that's those are my favorite books as a kid for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think somebody's trying to be funny here, but a question come through. What is the cat's name?
It's Knox, which isn't a name that I personally chose. But I appreciate the Harry Potter reference there. So it's a very demanding cat at the moment. Yeah.
Probably just wants some treats and or a scratch on the ear or under the chin.
Okay, that's good to know.
For cat care.
I like cats.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for taking the time to read and to answer our questions. I believe time-wise now we're going to switch over to Sarah and Neil. So I will say see you later for this.
Thank you. It was lovely chatting.
That's okay. You're welcome to stay on the call if you want to listen to the rest of it, but I know you're very tired, so if you want to hop off as well, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
So over to me. Hello, everybody. I am very excited to introduce our next speaker, someone who was a journalist for 15 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then
15 years.
And then came into the wonderful world of writing. I also have not a hard copy, unfortunately, but a lovely poster printout of the new book. Oh, you've shown me up, Neil. You've shown me up. Fantastic.
Yeah, but I'm allowed to get these.
Well, that's it. So, yeah, I mean, if we want to start, if you just want to give a quick run over about yourself, what it is that you do and write, and then give us a little read, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, like you said, journalist for 15 years. Started my career in Dunfermline, actually, at Dunfermline Herald and Post on Guildhall Street. So I got to do all the kind of strange little quirky stories that you did. I ended up at Gordon Brown's wedding by mistake. I interviewed Ian Banks a couple of times, ended up interviewing Ian Rankin, with a whole host of great stories here. And then I moved to the Edinburgh Evening News, then the Scotsman, and then, seeing the way things were going, I kind of moved into communications and working for the government. But writing was all I ever wanted to do. And I just got started with my first series of books, which was set in Edinburgh, which came about because I was so frustrated about not being published. I thought to myself, what would happen if you threw somebody off the Scott Monument? And I wrote that, and that was falling fast. That became my first book. And then I just did another 2 of them in the Doug and Susie series. And then I moved on to this, which was in Stirling, which was based on the Bloody Scotland Festival, which has just passed. I was there 1 year, and I was up at the Cowan's Hospital at the top of the town watching the football match, and me being me, I suddenly thought to myself, this would be a great place to dump a body. This would be a great place to decapitate a body and then dump it. Right. So I went for a wee walk around Stirling, had a look, and I thought to myself, right, what could you do with this? Nobody's ever written a crime series in Stirling. I can write a crime series in Stirling. And that was how Connor was born. And then that was how, No Man's Land, The Point of No Return, this one came out. And this is the 3rd Connor book, which has just come out in hardback, and for the first time in audio as well, which is a bit strange hearing somebody else reading your work and doing it a lot better than I could ever do.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Hearing your own work read back to you.
Oh,
But
it's
amazing.
bizarre.
So I'm not sure. Do you want to read a little extract, or we can?
If people want me to read, I'm quite happy to read. I will not do as good as my Audible narrator, but
I think that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I might swear. Is that okay for people, or should I try and self-edit? It's me. I'll try and self-edit.
Okay, thank you.
Free is a 4-letter word. The thought strikes me suddenly, and I'm forced to swallow down the unexpected laughter that tickles the back of my throat like champagne bubbles. Laughter at this moment will draw attention, and what I need right now is dignified composure. So I strangle it, force my face to take on a neutral expression, nod at the appropriate times, cock my head when points are made. To the casual observer, I am somber, attentive, following proceedings intently. The truth is far simpler. I am elated. Finally, I am free. After 14 years of confinement, restraint, and denying myself, I am free. Free again to hunt, to roam, to kill. The revelation sends dull sparks fizzing across my eyes. The colours of the day suddenly becoming hard, dazzling things that seem to leap out at me, as though the contrast in the world has suddenly been dialed up all the way. I feel as though I'm having an out-of-body experience, drifting untethered, disconnected as bureaucracy grinds its way through seconds and minutes before finally, it's over and I'm released. I stagger out into the day, blinking like a newborn as cameras flash and questions are shouted. I put an arm out, wrap it around the person next to me, pull him close. I suppose it could be seen as a gesture of comfort, of support. Honestly, I'm clinging on for dear life. Finally, the noise and the chaos is behind us and the world takes on its former soft focus. We walk silently, falling into step with each other, no words needing to be spoken. After all, we've had more than a decade to consider this day. What more needs to be said now? I am free, finally, free to choose where I want to go and what I want to do. And what I want to do is very, very simple. It's the same thing I've wanted to do for the last 14 years. A tingle of anticipation flashes from my stomach to my crotch at the thought, free to do what I want. And where I want to do it is obvious. After all, they say home is where the heart is. And my heart has always been in Stirling. And that's the start of that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
No
I have a couple of questions for yourself, Neil.
Go for it.
So we are asking, is the fact that Doug McGregor, a journalist based on your own previous career?
Yes and no. I never plan my books. I have nothing more than an opening sentence, an idea, a paragraph, a line, an image, and then I just run with that for 100,000 words and hope for the best.
Oh,
Might explain my hairline. But with that, when I came up with Falling Fast, as I said, I was so frustrated at not being published. I thought, right, I'm going to throw somebody off the top of the Scott Monument. The body's going to land, splat, and I'll write that scene. How would I investigate that? What else have I got? Right, okay, I'm a reporter. Here's how a reporter would investigate that. And that's how Doug was born. So he was purely an instrument to try and get myself into the story, and that was the shortcut to do it. Partly because I gave myself an absolutely insane deadline to write Falling Fast as well. Don't ever try and write the first draft of your book and submit it to a publisher in 4 weeks, kids. Bad idea.
4 weeks.
Yeah, I can tell this story now, and this is a salutary tale of exactly how not to get published and how not to take the road. I was so frustrated. Basically, my whole thing about writing was I had promised my gran when I was growing up that I would dedicate my first book to her. Life got in the way, marriage, kids, etc., and I didn't do it when she was still here. But something came along and reminded me of that promise, and I got so frustrated about not being able to do it that I wrote the first couple of chapters of Falling Fast, and I sent it off to a publisher. Please consider this, etc., etc. Heard nothing, went about my life, and I got a message back saying, I really, really like this. Can I see the rest of it, please? Okay, can you give me a couple of weeks just to polish it and get it ready? So I sat every night and pounded out about 8,000 to 10,000 words, chunking away at this book. Got a draft out in 4 weeks in total and sent it off. That's not the draft. I should say the draft that was there isn't the book that's published. It's very different, but yeah.
That is insanely impressive.
Don't do that at home, kids. It really is not a clever way to do things.
No, that definitely blew me away. 4 weeks for the first draft of the book. If you can do that, then anything is possible. Sorry, I've got another question coming from Claire, actually, saying, why do you think Scotland inspires or produces so much crime fiction?
It's a good question. I think part of it is we're naturally a country of storytellers. If you take it back, we've been poets, we've got Burns, we've got song, we've got storied history all the way back. And I think for not just for Scots, but generally, Stuart McBride, who's a brilliant writer, once said, if you want to understand a period in history of a country, go and read the crime fiction of that era, and that'll give you the social narrative that you want. And I think that's one of the big things, is that there's a lot of people out there, natural born storytellers, who are tweaking around and trying to make sense of what's going on, and that comes out in crime fiction. It's either that or we're all frustrated serial killers and we're just, trying to kill each other and then being perfectly pleasant to each other face to face.
I'm hoping it's not the latter.
We'll leave the psychology students to deal with that one in the Scottish psyche and the underlying violence in it.
Definitely not my area of expertise anyway. I have another question from lovely Claire. You say you don't start books with a plan. Do you ever find you start following a plot line only to find it doesn't work and you have to backtrack?
Right, this is the point I have to touch anything wooden or formica or anything I can get my hands on. I've been very lucky so far that I will write things, and just because I'm chasing the story, I'm never more than the story's never more than like half a chapter ahead of me when I'm writing it. I don't know what the hell's going on. But I've been very lucky that even if I go down a blind alley, I can cut and paste that, and that'll turn up in either another book or another section, or it'll give me something else to work on. But I have been very lucky, and I have been very instinctual in my writing. That's not to say that the fear isn't there that one day I am going to smack into a brick wall at 75 miles an hour. I mean, when I was writing my first book, Falling Fast, there's a line in that even now that I can go to about 65,000 words, and I will read that line and the hairs on the back of my neck will stand up, because that was the line that unlocked the full book for me. I didn't know what the hell was going on until I wrote this line, and suddenly it was like, right, okay, now I know what's going on. But until that point, I didn't know. But I've been lucky so far. Touch wood.
Touch all the wood. Touch on wood as well.
Touch everything. Yeah.
So no, that's fantastic. I have a question for you from
Go for it.
myself. Did you, when you were younger, did you know that you wanted to go into journalism or be a writer?
I always knew I wanted.
Sorry.
No. I always wanted to write. That was always the only thing I ever wanted to do. You know, I was pushed into be a doctor, be an engineer, be this, be that. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. But from a very early stage, I knew I wanted to work with words, but I knew I needed to find a way to work with words and have a living and have a career, as it were, until such time as I could get published and do the Stephen King deal. Obviously, I'm still waiting for the Stephen King deal. But I looked at it and I thought, right, how do I work with words? How do I tell stories? How do I do this as a career? Right, I'll be a journalist. And that's how it all kind of came about. So the journalism was always secondary to the desire that I wanted to be a writer, because I always knew this was, ever since I could read, this is all I've ever wanted to do, is write books.
It must be so nice that, like, because when I was younger, I wanted to be a vet, and I am the most removed from a vet that I could ever be. But it must be nice to grow up and fulfill your childhood dreams of.
It's strange because a lot of people, you know, when I was growing up, my best friend who did the covers for the first 3 books was one of the most naturally talented graphic designers, and he still is, that you could ever meet. He's just got that gift. He started studying to be a software engineer. And I never had that, you know, I never had that deviation. It was always, right, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going that way. So I was very lucky that that was always there. There was never any question in my mind of, but you could do this and you could do that and you could do this or you could be that. It was always, no, I'm going to be a writer.
And that's what you are. Fantastic.
Well, that depends on the Amazon reviews that you read.
No, the ones that I've read are all fantastic. I have another question that's come through. As you mentioned, McGregor and Drummond are largely based in Edinburgh, and Conor Fraser focuses on Stirling. Which city is better?
Oh God, I'm pleading the fifth and saying Dunfermline's better, because Dunfermline are actually Kouros does actually turn up in this. But yeah, and I've got a great idea. I am going to kill somebody and dump them in Pittencrieff Park in a book, I hasten to add. Sorry, I should just kind of put that preface in there. I love both places. I mean, I'm an Edinburgh boy. You know, I was born just outside Edinburgh and I've worked at the Scotsman. So I worked in Edinburgh for many's a year, met my wife there, etc. So I know Edinburgh. You know, Edinburgh's meant a lot to me. Stirling has given me a lot because obviously I was nominated for the Book of the Year prize with Bloody Scotland the first year I was published, which gave my career this kind of boost that you wouldn't normally get. I've met a lot of friends at Stirling. I have a great time at Stirling. It's always fun. So I've got a great fondness for Stirling, and it's given me a career with that. But to be more serious about it, Dunfermline's home. You know, when I worked here as a journalist, I always knew that I wanted to come back here because I got to know the area very well, and I got to know the outlying areas and the villages and the towns, and I always wanted to come back. So Dunfermline was just home. So yeah, I'll plead the fifth to say Dunfermline's the better.
Nice. But on a more serious note, alongside the Scottish psyche, what do you think it is about Scottish cities that lend themselves so well to the crime genre or tartan noir?
Ooh, I suppose every city's different and every city's got its own voice. I mean, Edinburgh, if you look at it, Edinburgh is a Gothic masterpiece. Sorry, I'm about to be interrupted by one of my dogs. Do you want to make a special guest appearance? Come on, man, up you come. Edinburgh is kind of like, Edinburgh is not a city. Edinburgh is a town, a village, or a street that evolved into a city. So it's got that, and you look at the architecture of Edinburgh, it lends itself to that with the dark nooks and crannies. Glasgow, with its more rigid kind of grid structure as a city, as it were, was something else. And then they drove a motorway through half of Glasgow. So they gave it that kind of schizophrenic idea to it. You know, Stirling's got its own history. Dunfermline's got its own history. We've got Robert the Bruce buried here. Because of the history that bleeds into, through its architecture, the present day, I think it just gives you that natural backdrop for a great story. And Ian Rankin always talks about Edinburgh being a character in one of his books. And that's what I try to do with Sterling or wherever I write. And I think other writers just pick up on that. And because there is so much history there, the best thing any writer can do walk down a street and say, what if? So if you walk down a street in Aberdeen, say, what if somebody was found there? Or if you walk along Edinburgh, look at the Scott Monument and say, what if somebody fell off the Scott Monument? Or if you walk through Stirling and say, what if I dumped somebody up at the Holy Rood? And then you're away to the races. And I think that's it. They're just, because of the history, they're just natural places to tell stories and set stories in.
They do have a lot of history in themselves, don't they? Is there a fictional character that was created by someone else that you would like to write a story about?
Arthur Shelby. I'd love to get her. Honestly, I watched Peaky Blinders, and Arthur is just a brilliant character that you would just love. You'd love to jump into the steering wheel and take him for a wee ride and see what you could do with him, because he's just so brilliantly done. More seriously though, there's a couple. That's like trying to ask, who's your favourite kid? It depends who brings me my coffee in the morning the fastest. Craig Russell has written Lennox, which is one of the most layered, beautiful characters who's set in 50s Glasgow that you could ever imagine. But I probably would be too scared to get a hold of him just in case. My pal Douglas Skelton wrote a series of books about a guy called Dominic Quest, which is the most unlikely name in Scottish literature. But it's a really kind of comic, fast-paced, one-liner, snappy crime fiction mystery, and I'd love to take that for a ride. But again, my Dominic Quest or my Jan Fabel or my Lennox wouldn't be Craig or Douglas's character. You've got to give your character your own thing. So I think I'd be more than happy to just kind of let them do their things and read them and enjoy that, and then take my own characters and see where they go.
Sorry, I've just clocked the next question. And
Go on then. I think I saw it flash up and then it disappeared. Go on.
So it says, in the point of no return, the fantastic line, "You're as threatening as my last shite," is used. What's your favourite insult?
My favourite insult? Oh, God, now you're asking. You're friends with Douglas Skelton, aren't you? That's probably about the nastiest thing anybody can say to me. Because Douglas is just the bane of my life. I met him. Sorry, joking aside, I digress. I met Douglas 6 years ago when I was doing my first ever thing in Bristol, and he's been one of the most genuinely supportive people in crime fiction that I could ask for. And he's one of the 4 blokes in search of a plot, which I do, which is the other thing that I do, which is 4 crime writers get up on a stage. We're given a protagonist and a murder weapon, and we have to live write a story over the course of an hour. But of course, being Scot, the only way that I can express any affection for Douglas or say that he's been a huge supporter of my work is to rip the absolute hell out of him as where I can. So that's probably one of the best. Or, "You're not a Daily Mail journalist, are you?" That's pretty bad. And I'm not. I turned the Daily Mail down twice.
Good man. Do you have a favourite strange story from the Herald and Post?
Oh yes. Can I tell 2?
Of course you can.
Right. First one was the circuit court used to happen down at Dunfermline Sheriff Court on Tuesday morning, basically mopping up the weekend stuff of drunk driving, drunken, disorderly, the usual stuff that you get in and around the towns. And there was this one kid. The press used to sit in we used to sit in the jury box, and the judge would sit at the front. Obviously, folk would be running in and out. Verdict would be assigned, and that would be it. And this one kid was brought in, and he was just this mess of kind of tics and nervous energy. And the judge, he'd been done for speeding through Crossford. And the judge said to me, "You were marked at doing 84 miles an hour in a 30 zone. Young man, what were you in when you did such a ridiculous speed?" And the wee kid kind of turned up, "My Kappa shell suit and my trackies, man." And the entire court just burst into laughter. And the judge was a real old Wrath of God style judge. "I will have order in my court, order, order." And everybody was just gone. That was a brilliant one. The other one was when they were building the crematorium. Oh, sorry, no, the crematorium was there at Dunfermline, and the new houses that are, if you're driving down on the left-hand side going up the hill, there was a planning objection put in from the community council about these new houses going in, and there was a planning meeting in Dunfermline, and this one old guy stood up and he was giving his evidence, and he gave me the best headline of my career, which you will never beat. He stood up and he basically screamed in, Old Testament Wrath of God style, "If you build these houses, the bodies of the dead will wash the streets of Dunfermline," because he was worried that the floodplain would move things. So this is the headline that we got, the bodies will flood the streets of Dunfermline. So those were two of the best that I got from the Herald and Post. It was brilliant. It was such a good time because you had you had the Chancellor here, you had Ian Banks round the corner, you had some pretty wild stories that were going on. So it was just great fun.
I imagine you've heard and seen a lot of things.
Oh God, yeah. No comment.
It's always wise. Always wise. I would like to ask, what advice would you give to writers who are struggling to start a story?
Oh God, to start a story, just get started. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be written. Stephen King says, you've gone from I'm going to write to I am writing to I have written. You've got to get that first step done. You can edit 50 to 100 to 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 words of crap. You cannot edit what you have not written. So don't sit, and this is purely me joking aside, don't sit and plan it out meticulously. Don't think you have to know exactly where the story is and where every character is going before you go. Get a central idea and then run with it. You can fix all the problems that you do later on, but as long as you get a draft of something, whether it be a short story, a novella, a full book, as long as you've got that first draft, you've got something tangible that you can work with. You can edit 500 words of crap. You cannot edit the words that you have procrastinated by saying, I'm going to walk the dogs again, or I'm going to cut the grass again, or I'm going to do X or Y. There comes a point where you have to just sit down and say, right, I'm either going to write a book or I am writing a book. Let's move to I am writing a book. So let's get started. And the other thing is, this is the kind of dichotomy of treat it as a job, because it is a job at the end of the day, but never treat it too seriously. End of the day, writing is about fun. You are here. If you take it to its most basic, writing is an act of lunacy. I am trying to take what I'm seeing in there and put it into your head with words. That's insane. That's an act of telepathy. So don't take it too seriously. Go and enjoy it and enjoy the journey, but treat it as work while you're doing it. And that's the last serious thing I'm going to say tonight.
I think that sounds like some very solid advice, though. So just get the pen on the paper, is what you're saying. If you're going to do it,
get started. Just go.
I like it. So from Anne, as a big fan of Falling Fast, The Storm, and All the Devils, will there be another McGregor and Drummond book?
Yes, there definitely will be. The Storm finished on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I've really got to finish that off for a start. But yes, they will be coming back. And as it so happens, in the next Connor book, there might be a certain appearance from a certain somebody from Doug and Susie's world who just kind of saunters in. I didn't know this was going to happen until I wrote it. Again, this is not planning, but I was writing a scene for the next one, which is out next year, which is called No Quarter Given. I was writing that, and suddenly this character from Doug and Susie's world just kind of ambled into the scene. Said, "Hiya, I'm here. They put me into this scene," and it just worked. So yes, they will be back. Don't worry, and I will resolve the cliffhanger that I left in The Storm, for which I'm sorry I got distracted by Connor.
That is fine. And if Doug, Susie, and Connor were to appear in their own TV series, who would you like to play them?
Oh God, the impossible question. I'll be honest, I don't know, because I can't see their faces. It's a weird thing. I know Connor, Doug, Susie inside out. You know, I know exactly how they're going to react in any given situation. I know what they're going to do, but I cannot see their faces. Somebody, who is it? I think it was on Twitter. Somebody recently said that the guy, I've never watched an episode, so I don't know. The guy from Outlander, what's his name? Sam something or other. But, you know, he could fill Connor. The only precept I would have for Connor specifically is they would have to be the physical build of Connor, because a lot of Connor is built in the fact that when he's got a problem, when he's stressed, when he's trying to figure things out, he goes to the gym because his granddad taught him to do that. Sam Hugan, thank you, Craig. It would need to be somebody with the physicality of Connor, aka not Tom Cruise, who was never Jack Reacher. So it would have to be somebody who has the physicality of the characters. But other than that, I don't know, because I can't see their faces, which I know is a really strange thing. James Oswald has the same thing, where he talks about Constance Fairchild and Tony McClane, and he knows them inside out, but he can't see their faces, so he doesn't know who might do it. But if there are any actors out there who want to do it, more than happy, as long as you've got the bill.
Get in touch, yeah. And does not seeing the characters as someone else help by allowing freedom when you're writing their stories?
I don't think it even becomes a conscious thing. The trick for me, and again, this goes back to the complete non-planning thing, is you just let the characters off the chain and let them do what they want. Ian Banks, who was phenomenal in every way, used to say that, you know, he was the god of his world when he was writing a book, and everybody knew exactly what they were going to do, and he was in charge, and he was the conductor of the orchestra of his book, and he knew the book was working when the little shit started talking back to him. And that's exactly how it should be when you write something, or you try and write something. You try and get a character to go somewhere, and the character in your head goes, "No, I'm not doing that." I've had that 2-3 times. As long as you've got that and you've given them the kind of freedom to do what they want, you're in that sweet spot. So don't kind of, again, going back to the writing advice, don't try and pigeonhole them down to this character will be this, and this character will be that, and this character will be this. Because like life, something's going to come along in the narrative flow and go, no, they're going that way instead. And that's where the key of writing is, because that's the joy of discovery. God, that sounded almost serious again. Sorry about this.
No, these answers are fantastic. I think it's so interesting getting into the heads of writers and finding out kind of what
Not a place you want to be, seriously. I've spent a lot of time interviewing authors over the last 6 years. Not a place you want to get to.
It's very interesting to hear, though, to hear your inspirations and things. So I think we have one last question for you, Neil, and it was, what were your favourite books growing up?
Growing up? God almighty. I was a voracious reader. I still am. Started off of all things with Batman comics, early 60s, 70s Batman comics, with my gran teaching me how to read. Moved on to Roald Dahl and all the kids' books. But the first book that really made an impression on me was when I was in, I think it was either primary 7 or first year. I think it was first year. I'd read through all the kind of teen fiction and all this stuff and the young adult stuff. And I was checking some books out, and my librarian, just under the lip of her desk, there was this cover of this book with a woman's face covered in blood in it. And I thought, this looks very interesting. Pulled it out, and it was Carrie by Stephen King. So I borrowed that book. First time I got into trouble. Luckily, I didn't get a criminal record for it, but I checked that book out without getting it stamped or anything. And I read it, and it was the first book that really hit me that this is the power of words. Because there was something in Carrie. It's not a perfect book, but it's Stephen King's first book, and you can feel the heat of him trying to tell a story and trying to get there, trying to get all these ideas down onto the page. And it was the first book that told me, yeah, there's a visceral thing here. Let's go chase that. So yeah, I would say that. And obviously the classics like Conan Doyle and everything else. I read anything that was put in front of me when I was a kid.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much, Neil, for your time, your inspiration, your fabulous stories from the Herald and Post,
Hope that was okay.
and keeping us all entertained. And good luck with the writing. Hope you continue to produce fabulous books for us to read.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Honestly, really appreciate you being here. So I think now what we're going to do, we missed a little break that we should have had in between Lily and Neil. So we'll go to a break just now, just before I then swap over to my lovely co-host Jade, and she can introduce our next author. So if we come back, well, not come back, but if you want to grab some refreshments and things, is it 1:15? Am I right in saying 1:15? 10 past, sorry guys, 10 past, and we'll kick it off again then. Cue some elevator.
Forgive me, that was my fault. I should have waited for the presentation to end. I think we've got a couple of minutes before we'll be joined by our next lovely author. But I just wanted to hop on real quick and say thank you all for tuning in and watching tonight. This is the second of our Freshers event here at the FCSA. There's still time to sign up for Thursday's quiz, where we go head to head with Heiza, and we have Mark Labette hosting that quiz for us. That should be a fun and exciting night. Lots of prizes to be won. And then, of course, on Friday night, we have arranged to have a live stream DJ for you all. We are, obviously, today's restrictions have meant that we have set up a Zoom call as well, so that you can still party with other people whilst watching the live stream DJ. So make sure you can sign up for tickets and stuff to that if you would like to. All details are on the freshers section of the Fife College Students Association webpage. And I think we're at one more minute, and then we will say hello. If she's back in, we'll give her a second just to grab her refreshments and stuff. Oh, she's here. Hello. Hi, Blair.
Hello.
Hello. So yes, this is Claire Askew, our lovely award-winning author and poet, I believe.
Yes, that too, for my sins.
Too. And like the others, you have a new book coming out. Is it being released this year?
This one.
This one here?
Yes. Yeah, it just came out in August, so it's exactly a month old.
Oh, it just came out. I thought it was
Yeah.
coming out in a month. So that's my bad. I've lost my notes because I'm a terrible
That's
human
all right.
being.
Time is meaningless in 2020, so it's fine.
You know what? It really is. Can't remember what I had for dinner. Never mind trying to remember all the different things. So apologies. It's been out for a month.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us a little run through about yourself and about your published work?
Yeah, totally. So my name is Claire Askew. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Like Neil, I am a writer of crime fiction. So Cover Your Tracks is my third book, and it's the third in the D.I. Birch series. D.I. Helen Birch is my fictional detective inspector, and she lives in Edinburgh, and she works out of the Fettes Avenue police station in Edinburgh, and all the books are set in Edinburgh. And this one is she's kind of having quite a nice chill time. She's just sitting doing her emails and stuff, and then this bloke walks into the police station and says that he wants to report both of his parents missing. And she thinks that's kind of weird, but a missing person case is not too difficult to handle, she thinks. And then she discovers that he hasn't actually seen them for 30 years. And so the trail has gone completely cold in terms of where they have been. And so there's questions as to why he's only reporting this now, and also questions about where the heck they are. And when she starts to dig, literally and figuratively, into where they are, she uncovers all sorts of skeletons in the family closet, basically. So that's the little teaser.
Wow.
Taster of the book, basically.
Yeah, and what an intriguing concept. I like that. I'm gonna have to go buy it now. I'm one of those people that has a bookshelf full of books, and I buy them in bulk, and then try and catch up. But I think I might move that to one of the top of the list, the pile rather. So you say this is your third book in the series?
Yes, yeah, and my third novel too. So I've never written any fiction other than crime fiction, but I was a poet for 10 years before I started to write fiction. Yeah. So I also have a body of work in poetry, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's cringeworthy, and it's out there. But yeah, so
although we are all struggling with.
Bear with.
Am I still on? Sorry.
Yeah, no, you are still on. I just another kind of sound came through. Do you? You've kind of given us a little kind of overview tidbit. Do you want to do a little reading for us?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm gonna read from the middle of the book.
This is where all the juicy stuff is.
Yeah. So this is right in the middle of the action. So Birch, all the way through this book so far, has had just this really bad feeling. She's got a hunch, and nobody else kind of believes that what she's onto is necessarily a thing. A lot of people have said to her, you just need to chalk it up to weird coincidence and just calm down. But she's determined to follow this hunch, and in doing so, she finds herself in the middle of a wood, in the middle of nowhere, looking for clues. And she's aware that this is mad, but she's doing it anyway. So this is her. We are joining her in the wood, bent over, looking on the ground with her phone torch, looking to see what she can find. So, what are you even looking for, Helen? She had no idea, but she couldn't stop moving from one square foot to the next, shining her tiny light. Inside her, the bad feeling seemed to have grown, like one of those pellets of tea that flowers into an ugly floating bloom. If I were him, she thought, if I had things to hide. She turned to go deeper into the wood. I'd go this way, she thought, further from the railway tracks. It was darker further in, and the undergrowth was thinner. Birch could feel a cold sweat developing on her face. I'd look for a clear spot where I could bury something, a place where the tree roots wouldn't get in the way. She straightened up, and sure enough, only a few meters ahead, there was a dappled patch of ground where the tree canopy gave way and light filtered down to the mulchy floor. The plantation was pretty regular, but perhaps a tree had failed or fallen and never been replaced. She stepped into the light patch and bent down once again. There was greenery here, a few weak-looking plants reaching for the light. With no other tool at her disposal, Birch cracked her police baton and scraped at the soil around her feet. You are mad, she thought, as she notched a small channel into the earth. You are in the middle of nowhere, scratching at the ground in a wood. You have about 10 different cases sitting on your desk that you ought to be working on. This is madness. It really is absolute. And the baton hit something. The channel was about 3 inches deep, but something was preventing her from making it any deeper. Now she stuck the heel of her shoe more soil. Still the hard thing got in the way. She reached down and brushed away dirt and pine needles. It was a rock, rough and craggy feeling. She set her heel to its protruding edge and tried to work it upward, but it was too big to move. Now she was on her hands and knees, scrabbling with the baton to uncover more of the stone. Now you're excavating a rock, she thought. MacLeod is going to go insane if he finds out about any of this. Before long, her nails were ragged and clogged with soil. Her trousers were filthy. She couldn't really see in the dim light, but she could feel that they were filmed all over with dirt. But now when she stabbed at the rock with the baton, it moved ever so slightly. A little more digging and she could get her fingers underneath the edge and rock it back and forth. She did this for a long time, in what little light there was leaching away from the clearing, turning the plantation grey and formless. But the rock was almost out now. She could feel it was about a foot across, and underneath it the soil was damp and slimy. Birch was sweating, her fringe plastered to her forehead, but she finally levered the big rock out of the ground and pushed it aside. The bad feeling was pulsing through her now as she reached for her phone and lit up the torch beam once more. In the well the rock had left behind, pale roots snaked this way and that in a lattice made by the surrounding trees. She pushed her hand in amongst them, closing her fist around as much of the root network as she could, and then she pulled, and there was a delicious crackling sound as the roots came away from the soil. Fuck's sake, she thought, this is like a horror film. I'm like the mad lab assistant sent into the woods to dig up mandrake. Below the stringy roots, there were more, some thicker, some nearly as fine as hair. She plunged her hand into the hole once again. This time there was something else among the roots, something slimy or shiny or... She shone the flashlight into the hole and pulled away soil with the other hand. After a few moments, she fell backwards out of her crouch, recoiling from the muddy channel she'd made. She sat on the forest floor, breathless and filthy for several minutes, waiting as her heartbeat slowed, settled. Oh, Jesus, fuck, she said, and her voice bounced back at her from the dark trees. And I'll stop there. Sorry for the swears, but I thought it's after the. No, it's not after the watershed. Sorry. Sorry for the swears. Anyway, hopefully we're all adults here.
Fine. You're
She's
reading
a sweary lady, Helen Birch. She's a bit of a sweary lady.
That's totally fine. Where I'm sure most of our students are adults, so give you a pass on the swearing. Very intriguing. I like where you've stopped there. Yeah,
that is the end of a chapter as well. So the cliffhanger is.
So you're definitely not going to sleep after reading that chapter because you're going to have to.
You've got to keep going. Yeah,
you got to keep going. Okay, so we'll go to some questions. So as Neil touched on, do you think about Edinburgh as a character in the D.I. Birch books?
Yeah, I do. I think I'm really interested in showing the Edinburgh that you maybe don't think of or you don't see very often. It's certainly not tourist Edinburgh, so I'm not really fussed about the Royal Mile or the castle or any of that stuff. Not because it's not lovely, but because it's appeared in so many other books and films and whatnot. So I quite like to put Birch in places around Edinburgh that people might not already be familiar with or that you might not expect to see in a book. So, you know, in my first novel, which was called All the Hidden Truths, she spends quite a lot of time sitting in traffic in Leith, for example. She drives down Seafield, which is like a notoriously pain in the arse road where there's always loads of traffic, and she sits in the traffic and she goes past the sewage works and the cemetery and stuff, and the drive-in McDonald's and things. So I really like to kind of show the Edinburgh that the tourists don't see, because it still has loads of character of its own, and it has a lot of atmosphere and lots of interesting people. So yeah, I'm kind of fascinated by Edinburgh's kind of so-called boring bits, and trying to show that they're interesting too. And in this book, Birch ventures a little bit outside the city, and she actually goes into South Lanarkshire, which is where this wood is. So I get a bit of South Lanarkshire in there as well. And even though it's kind of the site of what turns out to be a lot of horrible stuff, a couple of people have actually emailed me to say, thank you so much for putting South Lanarkshire in a book. Like, we don't see South Lanarkshire very often in fiction, so that's nice. And in the next book that I'm writing, she's actually going to the Scottish borders, so she's starting to extend her radius a little bit.
Nice, I like it. It's funny that you mentioned Leith is kind of one of the not very sort of nice parts. I know so many people that are like, oh yeah, we'll go for like wanting to go out down there. It must have cleaned itself up.
I mean, Leith is great. No shade to Leith.
No shade at all. But yeah, it's
not so great.
One of those things that I think is kind of up and coming as well. So I think it's really like interesting that you're showing off these, because it's just on the outskirts. It's really cool bits. Mm-hmm. So I've had another question come in. This one is from Kirsty. She says, the titles of your books are great, and I think that they tell us a lot about what's important in them, not just the actual crime, but how it affects people. So she's wondering, how do you come up with them?
This is a really interesting process, actually, because it's not I don't just come up with them on my own. It's actually kind of decided by committee. So my first book, All the Hidden Truths, that was not my idea at all. That title came from my agent. The book, when I submitted it, was called Three Rivers, which tells you precisely nothing about what's in the book. Three Rivers is just the name of the college that's in the book. It's about a college shooting. And Three Rivers is the fictional college. And so my agent and my editor kind of all pitched in with loads of ideas for titles, and we ended up with probably about 30 that we were sort of seriously considering, and then we slowly just sort of whittled them down, and eventually All the Hidden Truths was the winner. And I was a little bit, to be honest, like, does All the Hidden Truths actually mean anything? You know, it felt like a collection of words that didn't necessarily actually mean anything. But loads of people have come up to me and said, what a good title for that book, it fits so perfectly. So my agent knows what she's doing, basically. And then the second book in the series is called What You Pay For, which I had originally wanted to call it Operation Citrine, which is the name of the police operation in the book. And I was really, really keen on that title and wanted to fight for it. And yet, again, Kath, my agent, pointed out that Operation Citrine sounds like a science fiction novel, and that won't do. So we went with What You Pay For, which was my second choice. But then this one, I did actually choose it. It was called Cover Your Tracks all the way through the writing of it, and they agreed that I could have this one. So that one was a victory. But yeah, it can be decided by someone who is not you, which is quite strange. And then you have to get used to the idea of a title that someone else has given you, but they know what they're talking about. So
fair enough. No, I think they're good, and people seem to like them. So well done to your management team as well. Good team. So we had a question from Claire earlier, and she'd like asked you as well, which is why do you think Scotland inspires or produces so much crime fiction?
That's me being asked my own question, isn't it? That I asked Neil.
Yeah,
yeah, I should have known that would happen.
Trying to trick you.
Neil said a lot of good stuff about how people who live in Scotland are natural storytellers. I think that's really true. But also, I think Scotland just has so much mood. It's the weather and the kind of, you know, the look and the architecture of our cities and towns. You know, I think crow-stepped buildings are like incredibly cool. You know, we just and you know, like little narrow closes, and there are all sorts of cool buildings and streets and alleyways in Scotland, and they are all full of weather. You know, we have such good moody crime fiction weather in Scotland. You know, like massive haws that come in off the sea and stuff. And I think that really contributes to it, because in an Edinburgh February where you're walking down, you know, a street called Flesh Market Close, and the har has rolled in and you can't see your hand in front of your face, you're like, yes, I can fully understand how, you know, multiple horrible crimes could be committed just in this one street. So yeah, Scotland really provides like the perfect mood for crime fiction, and then it's just about filling in the events, I think.
Fair enough. I like it. Good answer. I suppose you had potentially thought about it before when you were asking sort of Neil, but I like it.
Yeah, I had a feeling that might come back to me, I have to say.
Yeah, right. So my next one then is, does your experience working in a college influence your writing? So you done a lot of work with kind of colleges and other academic areas, haven't you?
Yeah, so I started my career as a further education lecturer at what was Edinburgh Telford College, now part of Edinburgh College. And All the Hidden Truths, my first book, was actually dedicated to my students, because they taught me so much about life and the universe and everything. I did a lot of work. I taught communication, so I did a lot of work on lots and lots of different courses. You know, particularly kind of things like engineering and construction and that sort of stuff. So I worked with a lot of young men in particular, just because of the types of courses that they were. Sport and fitness as well was another one that I worked on. And it was, you know, I wanted to write a novel set in a college, and I kind of wanted to write a novel about it's heavy stuff, this, but I wanted to write a book about toxic masculinity and kind of what causes men in particular, but people in general, to kind of do terrible things, to commit terrible acts. And it was incredibly useful to me to work a lot with young men who were quite happy to talk to me about their experiences of feeling kind of angry about the world and feeling like, you know, they didn't like, I worked with a lot of young men who had never been tested for dyslexia until they got to college, for example, and they had always been kind of treated like they were bad kids in school, and then when they finally got to college, they were like, oh, that is why I found it so difficult to concentrate in school, and I have always been really angry, and now suddenly I understand like what's going on with my life and I can sort myself out. And, you know, and feel proud of my work again and stuff. And you know, having conversations with people like that, and being able to understand the very legitimate reasons why young people might feel angry and disenfranchised in this world, was incredibly useful to me as someone who's, you know, always found learning and writing and things very, very easy, because I've always been like a bookworm and stuff. So working in a further education college helped me to meet people that I might never otherwise have met, and hear perspectives that I might never otherwise have heard. And I just think FE colleges are like great places. They're sort of melting pots of loads of different kinds of experiences and stuff. So yeah, I really miss it. Can you tell I really miss working in FE? It was great. So yeah. That was a massive long answer, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good, and I'm glad you love the kind of college environment. I do too. So yeah, no, and you're touching on the kind of experience of students who, like you were saying with the dyslexia and stuff. I didn't get tested for dyslexia until I came to college, and that it has an impact on your work and stuff. So yeah.
And I should say, for anyone who reads the book is about a young man who gets so angry about his circumstances that he commits a shooting. But I do not in any way suggest that people who are angry about the fact they haven't been tested for their dyslexia are going to go on and get a terrible life. It actually turns out with my character that he's had a very privileged life, and has, you know, is sort of a nice boy, and has done that anyway. And if anything, I want to kind of overturn the idea that certain kinds of people do bad things and certain kinds of people are good. So yeah, just to clarify that, in case anyone is like, she's saying dyslexic people are murderers. I'm not.
No. Not at all.
I dug myself into a hole there, but anyway.
Not at all. I didn't think that for a second.
Just
yeah.
Disclaimer, you know.
Full disclaimer. Okay, so we've had a question sent in from Joanna. So one of the reasons I really like D.I. Birch is the balance of the books between her at her work and her personal life, and seeing how they influence each other. Could you tell us a little bit about how you brought her to life?
Yeah, what a nice question, and what a nice thing to say. Thank you, Joanna. That's really nice to hear. So I decided that I wanted to make a character that was kind of unlike other female police characters. So I knew I wanted to write a female detective inspector, but excuse me, I think over the past few years there's been a sort of an upsurge in a particular type of female detective, which is, obviously she's written to kind of counter the quite macho world that crime fiction has been in previous decades. So often you get this female policewoman who's like incredibly capable and incredibly smart, and she's always 10 steps ahead of all the men, and you know, she's so good at her job that she's almost like a superhero. And I really didn't want to write somebody who was that. You know, I wanted to write basically kind of a normal, nice person who's doing a really hard job and sometimes really messes up, you know, because we all do, especially when we're doing very difficult things. And I kind of wanted her to have a bit of a difficult home life, because I think a lot of people do. And you know, I wanted to reflect the fact that not everybody's domestic lives are rosy. So Birch has, in the first book, she has a little brother who went missing when he was 21, and who has never been found, and his case is cold. And so she's kind of dealing with the grief of not knowing where her brother is. And also her dad isn't on the scene. He's, you know, he's alive and everything, but she's kind of estranged from her dad. And so that obviously influences her work, and she thinks about both her dad and her brother quite a lot, as you would if that was the case. So yeah, she just kind of, she's trying to do a hard job, and she's trying to deal with these elements of her past that she struggles with, basically. And I hope that makes her quite a well-rounded, relatable person, because we've all got stuff that we carry around with us, you know.
Yeah, I like that. She sounds very true to life.
Yeah, and she, you know, she eats too many takeaways, and she's not very good. She's not very good at reverse parking.
Is she me?
You know, you know. So yeah.
Not very good at reverse parking and eats too many takeaways. I like. Yeah, I can relate. So our next question for you then is, as a poet and a novelist, does your style in one influence your style in another, or are they kind of just totally separate for you?
So the poetry is kind of a blessing and a curse when it comes to the fiction writing. So on the one hand, being a poet makes you a good editor, I think, because with poetry you're always trying to distill things down to the clearest message that you can. And so I'd like to think that it helps me to make a sort of straightforward sentence. You know, on a sentence level, it's very useful. But it's also a curse because my poet brain will interrupt my fiction writing brain and go, let's spend an entire paragraph describing the dust motes in a sunbeam, or like the sound of the wind in the trees. And I kind of get a little bit carried away sometimes. And so my editor has to occasionally go, you've done the dust motes in the sunbeam 3 paragraphs ago, let's cut this bit now, you've done enough like poetic description. So poetry sometimes tries to get in there and invade the novel, and I have to keep cutting it out basically, but it's also useful. So I don't think the crime fiction influences the poetry particularly, but maybe one day it will. Maybe I'll write crime poems one day, I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, there's a little inspiration there that could pop up at some point. How do you approach writing the first sentence of like new work? Your new work?
Loads of people, industry type people, agents and so on, always say that the first sentence of the novel is really, really important. You have to hook people, and you have to, you know, so I will always spend a lot of time thinking about my first sentence, and often, you know, I'll write my first few chapters and then I'll go back and tweak the first sentence and polish it and stuff. And then usually what happens is in fact, what's happened with the past 2 books, including this one, is that my editor has got the draft and gone, the book doesn't start there, it starts over here. And so my perfectly crafted first sentence that I've spent so long thinking about goes from chapter 1 to like chapter 4. So in this book, what was chapter 4 became chapter 1 at the request of my editor, and my perfectly crafted sentence went into the middle of the book. So I would say, I know a lot of people talk about how important the opening sentence is, and it is, but don't stress over it too much because it might end up being cut or being put somewhere else entirely. So don't let that stop you from starting your novel, basically, because it's pressure and it's not necessary pressure. Fair
enough. That's so interesting. It can end up in different places, but yeah. It's one of those things, I guess. It's a slightly different kind of question here. So it says your up and coming book, Novelista, have I said that right? I hope so. Is about everyone can write about. Without spoiling the book, what would be your top tip for new writers? Yeah, so this book Novelista is coming out in October, on the 15th of October, and its subtitle is Anyone Can Write a Novel, Yes, Even You. And so it kind of it gives some tips for writing, but it also kind of busts some myths. And it basically, I've been teaching creative writing in one form or another for over 10 years. So it's basically kind of everything I've learned about writing a novel from teaching people how to write novels. My top tip is a bit of a sort of nebulous woo-woo one, but go with me. I think the most important thing is to believe that you deserve to write a novel. Because I meet loads and loads and loads of new writers or people who want to write novels who haven't started yet, who are kind of like,
I don't know if I'm really allowed to do this. Like, my English teacher always said I was a bit crap, or like, you know, writing isn't a real job. You know, I just don't know if I can do it. I don't know if it's for me. Who wants to hear what I've got to say? You know, lots of people come up with kind of very personal excuses for not starting. And I would say, sod what your English teacher said. Like if you want to write a novel, believe that you can write a novel. You're allowed, like anyone is allowed to write a novel, and your English teacher is not around anymore to tell you that you're not allowed. And if you are still 16 and in high school, just don't tell your English teacher. Like, you know, so self-belief is the biggest thing. And just every time you hear that little voice that goes, oh, you're not allowed to do this, this is boring, no one's going to read your novel, just basically go like that and go shut up to that voice, because I get that voice still. I've written 3 novels, I've published 3 novels, and I still get that voice. And you just have to believe that your novel is more important than what that voice has to say, basically. So yeah, self-belief is the top tip.
The top tip. I think that, yeah, that's really kind of inspiring. Just a little similar to what Neil was saying with the just write it, but you're saying just believe, just believe in yourself, and just do it. One foot in front of it and start.
Nothing else is actually really standing in your way, except for the stuff in your head telling you that you're not allowed or you shouldn't do this for whatever reason. So Neil's right. It's just you just have to write it and recognize that any voice that says you shouldn't be doing it is a voice in your own head that you can get rid of. You have the power, you know.
Only you are standing in your way. I like it. Step out of your own way. Okay. Is there another fictional world that you would like to create a story in, either using the characters or the settings?
Yes, what a nice question. So I love Edinburgh. It's the perfect setting for any book, in my opinion. And I would love to write a zombie novel set in Edinburgh. I have a whole idea. I've even got the chapter plan written out somewhere in a notebook. I've been wanting to do this for years, and I should really just write it, because I think Edinburgh would be a great, I mean, there are actually already Edinburgh zombie stories, but I have a kind of particular take on Edinburgh zombies that I would really like to write. So I need to do it at some point. I'll do it one day.
That sounds fascinating. I love zombie stuff. That sounds great.
Yeah, zombies are fascinating. They're kind of, I'm really interested in. Have you seen the show iZombie?
Yeah, I started it. I think I got halfway through season 1. But yeah, everybody has a very different take on the zombies. And yeah, I think you can do a lot with it. So I think you should write that book, Claire.
I will. And if anyone who's watching who hasn't watched iZombie, just briefly, it is about a criminal pathologist working in a police lab who solves crimes by eating the brains of the murder victims. She's a zombie, and she eats the brains of the murder victims who come into the lab, and that's how she solves crimes. And it's just like so cool. So yeah, watch iZombie. It's brilliant.
It's like we've veered slightly off. So we know what TV shows inspire you, but are there any other writers that inspire you?
Yeah, loads. So no, I have to get it right and not just list writers that I'm a fan of, because I'm a fan of lots of writers, but I'm inspired by I'm really inspired by Anne Cleeves. She's great. When I had just finished All the Hidden Truths, and it wasn't published yet. I got to go to Bloody Scotland, and Neil was going on about what a brilliant festival Bloody Scotland is. It really is. They do a thing where a new writer can go and do 5 minutes at the beginning of one of their events. So you're kind of like the support act. You sort of warm up the crowd for whoever's coming on. And I got to do it for Anne Cleeves, which was like goals. So I did this 5 minutes, but because it was Anne Cleeves, the crowd was like 700 people. And when she came out on stage, it was like seeing a rock star come out on stage. Like everyone was just rapt and absolutely loved her. And I got to sit next to her in the signing queue afterwards, and and hearing people come up and talk to her, and she was just so great with these readers who were coming and saying, like, I've been reading you for donkey's years, and you know, I'd never really read any books before yours, and then I got really into Vera, and then I have read all the Shetland novels and stuff. You know, she was just so warm and nice and brilliant, and her stories really, really resonate with people. And she also wrote for a long time before she kind of had a hit, but she kept going, you know, so she really, really inspires me, kind of the way she writes and the way she is as a person. So yeah, Anne Cleeves is I want to be Anne Cleeves when I grow up, basically.
It's nice. I've not, I'll be honest, I haven't heard of her, but I will. Yeah, I think it's nice to have different inspirations, and she seems to have lots of different stuff out there. Similarly, other than your own, obviously, what is the best book that you have read recently?
Ooh, one of the perks of being a writer is publishers send you books to read before they come out, which is really nice. And I was sent recently a book called Cat Step, which isn't out yet, but it's coming out in November, I think. So it's called Cat Step, and it's by a writer called Alison Irvine, and it's set in Lennoxtown in Scotland. And it's kind of a domestic drama thriller about a woman who makes a split-second decision that completely changes her entire life and kind of unravels her entire sense of who she is, basically. And it kind of changes the whole town around her. But it's set in Lennoxtown in the beautiful setting of the Campsie Fells, and it's got so much of that lovely kind of Scottish mood and weather and stuff in it. And I was just gripped by it. It was one of those where I was awake until like 3 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't stop reading it. So yeah, Cat Step. It's coming out in November. Everyone should look out for it. It's brilliant.
Okay, will do. Add that to the reading list. So I've got one last question for you that we will end on, and that will be, what were some of your favourite books growing up?
Okay, I was a massive nerd when I was growing up, so I read. I loved my fantasy books, and I don't know why I'm being like sheepish about that, because there's nothing wrong with liking fantasy. So I really liked all the Narnia books. I read all of those, especially The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which I think is like the maddest, most bizarre one. And then I read The Hobbit, and I loved The Hobbit. And then, of course, I graduated to The Lord of the Rings, and I'm a massive Lord of the Rings fan to this day. And I even like the films, even though they're quite cheesy and not very true to the books. So yeah, I was a big fantasy nerd when I was growing up. But I also obviously kind of got into crime fiction. And so I did read Agatha Christie. She was actually my kind of crime, my gateway crime person. I really like the Miss Marple novels, which I realise is really strange for a teenager because they're books about like an 80-year-old lady. But I really, really liked Miss Marple, and I really sort of related to her. So I don't know what that says about my teenage self. I was a bit premature old lady maybe, but yeah. So that it was I oscillated between like high fantasy with dragons and then little old lady solves crimes.
Nice. I think everybody liked those sort of Agatha Christie. I liked those as well. But...
yeah, they're great. She's the mistress of crime. Like she can't be touched. She's brilliant.
Good inspiration. It's a really good inspiration. Listen, Claire, thank you so much for joining us and for talking about your new book and all of your other kind of novels and answering our questions. It's been lovely to have you on.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
I think they've left the call, but just a thank you again to Neil, Abby and Lilith for joining, and I hope that you enjoyed the evening with us as much as we have here. It's been really lovely to kind of get to know some actual real life authors and to host something like this for the very first time ever. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful evening and go get writing that zombie book.
Thank you. I will.
If you enjoyed this video today, please remember and hit that like and subscribe button. If you're feeling extra generous, you can always leave us a little comment. It does help with the algorithm. And as always, go ahead and follow all of our other social media channels so that you stay up to date with everything that's happening with the FCSA. Thanks!